Well, the onions are ready. They've been pulled, and now they're in storage. Let me show you the best way to store onions that will help them last a long time. So first of all, this year I grew onions in containers. Haven't done that before. This is an experiment for me of sorts. And I just want you to know they came out great. These are wicking tubs, not just regular containers with holes drilled in the bottom of them. They have a reservoir in the bottom that holds about 3 gallons of water. But they've also got a weep hole on the side that keeps them from getting too full and too wet, and therefore it's a good place, a good environment for onions. So I planted them in this tub back in February, and they produce some really, really nice onions. So I planted them real thick with the intention of coming through, thinning them out as we wanted to eat green onions. We would thin them out and leave enough room for some of them to get big. And that's what we did. We had plenty of green onions early in the spring, and we pulled them strategically to give some of the onions more room to grow, more room to get big. All the onions are pulled now. I laid them out on the ground for a day or two to dry. So I dried them somewhat laying beside the tubs here where I pull them. But then I carried them over here to my secret weapon. This is the place I found last year that was the best onion storage place I've done yet. This is a rabbit cage. It's where actually I raised my new chickens from just little bitty babies up to the time they were ready to go in the big pen. And I just put the onions on top, and some of them are really, really nice. I mean, really nice onions. I did this last year. This is a south. South is behind me. So most of the summertime we have, if we have any wind at all, it's from the south. We get storms coming in from the south or whatever. Winds usually come from either the east or the south. Typically not the north in summertime. So wintertime, yes. Summertime is usually south winds. So this being south facing, winds are coming this way and are just slowly drying the onions. I could put a fan out here, and if you don't have a lot of wind, you could put a fan. This is a covered shed. It's just a little 4x8 area that is attached to my barn. I used to propagate some plants here. I had a misting system up under it, and it would spray the plants. That's where I propagated lots and lots of stuff. You can still see the irrigation lines there where the misters were. But works good. Watershed's off. It's not in direct sun. It's instead under a drying shed, I guess you could call it. And they will sit here till probably October or so. And the reason I say that is because last year I made the mistake of not taking into account that we were going to get some freezing weather in November or whenever it finally came. And because of that, I still had some onions up here, and they were still in good shape in October. But when that freeze came, you know what happens to an onion when it freezes. It gets kind of mushy, and that's what happened. So I lost some of the onions up here after they froze. But this year I will be sane enough to remember that I've got to get them out of here before it freezes. Take them in the barn, take them in the house, put them in the refrigerator, whatever. But I need to get them out of here so they won't freeze because they're outside. So just the best way I've found, they've got plenty of airflow underneath. You know, I don't have a lot of room between the onions and the ceiling here, so I can't really get in there like I would like to and spread them out, make sure they're not touching. It's best practice would be that they're not touching each other to give better airflow. And also, if you get one onion that starts to rot and it touches its neighbor, it can cause his neighbor some rotting issues. That's kind of like people too. You get close to rotten people and you might get a little rotten yourself. Anyway, there's a life lesson in there somewhere. But these onions in the containers did really, really well. They're perfect. Not all of them are big. Some of them are kind of small. That one's a small one. And some of them, I just noticed that one. That one's kind of oblong looking. But some really nice ones up in there. Containers are a good way to grow onions if you're not growing a ton of onions. Now, if you want hundreds of onions, if you need that, or if you're growing them for sale or something like that, then you don't want to use a container to do that. But if you just want some for you and mama and maybe a couple of kids or something like that, containers is a pretty good way to grow some nice onions. I can't get up in there really good, but there's one. That's probably the biggest one. If not, it's close. It's a big onion. That's bigger than a softball right there. Kind of flat, big onion. Now try to work him up in there where he doesn't touch anybody else. But that's a great way to store onions. Get you a cage or something like it, or build you something just like this platform here, and put some hardware cloth or some chicken wire or something across the top of it. Put you some boards like that across it, if you got some chicken wire or something that will support that chicken wire, and just lay your onions on it in the shade, under a roof if at all possible, and where you're going to get some good airflow. If not, provide a fan. I could bring a fan out here. It's covered. It's not going to get wet. But this works real well. Worked great for me last year, and it's a good way, the best way I found to store onions. Wind doesn't blow them off or anything like that. Animals don't typically mess with onions because they just don't like the way they taste. So the bird's not going to mess with them. Nothing's going to mess with them. Great way to store dadgum onions. So I highly recommend this. Put in the comments the best way that you found to store onions, because this may not be right for you, and others may want to read your comment and learn from you. But I will say I have strung them up by their stalks. I've strung them up outside, I've strung them up inside, I've strung them up in the barn, I've strung them up just about everywhere, and they just have never lasted as long as I thought they should have lasted. But last year, when I did it this way, they lasted a long time, till I froze them, or till God froze them, and I didn't take that in consideration. So, good place to store onions, good way to store onions, and easy to make. It could be two sawhorses under a tree. And if you're getting a lot of rain, that may not be the best practice, because you don't really, you're wanting them to dry. You're not wanting them to get wet. But a couple of sawhorses with a couple of boards under it, and some chicken wire or hardware cloth, something like that. Great place to store it. You could do it in your barn. You could do it under your carport, something like that. Doesn't have to be fancy. This certainly is not fancy. And it's full of chicken poop on the bottom. This is where my chickens were. And what I'm probably going to do is come in here, rinse off the bottom real good where the chickens pooped. And I've got a bunch of potatoes that I pulled, some Yukon Gold, and I'm probably going to come in here and put potatoes on the bottom. But we're storing onions, and this is a great, great way to do it. Give it a shot. Give it a try. All right. We're gone.